So there's many of those circular grasslands with no trees, many spots like that, and essentially the idea is that there was some sort of an airburst that created a shotgun blast where all these smaller particles, but maybe the size of this table, basically slammed into the ground.
Well, I'll tell you where it is now, and we're out on the I call the Carolina Bays.
Is this similar to what the Carolina Bays look like?
We'll call them up. Google Carolina Bays.
Okay.
You tell me.
Carolina Bays.
I don't mean to be suspenseful, but
No, suspense is killing me. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so they look very similar, and they're full of water?
Just some of them are.
Okay.
And those are the ones that the public that lives around them think of those, and they know, well, yeah, that's a unique geological feature. It's Carolina Bay. It's a lake. But little do they know that when you go look at them carefully, you can see them everywhere in the landscape. That they roads go around them instead of through them. The churches sit on the rims, and they bury people in the sandy rims, all the graveyards on the rim. So it actually has affected human settlement patterns where these wetlands are, because they're all wetlands. Some are actually lakes. But the curious thing, Danny, is that they orient themselves, I guess you could say. They are oriented in a particular direction.
What do you mean by that?
So if you are in New Jersey and you find a Carolina Bay, or you see one, or you see it through LIDAR, which is very fine elevation data, which you get with lasers, they point more westerly in, say, New Jersey. You get down to the Carolinas, and they point northeast. Then you get down to Georgia, and they point north. So they all converge. See that bottom left? If you'll scroll up.
Yeah, click on that bottom left with the yellow.
Yeah.
See that, Steve? Now it's your top left. Yep. Try to blow that up.
Yeah. So this was my dream, and I didn't have the wherewithal to do it, but others came along, and a wonderful guy, Michael Davies, went into full obsession mode for several years, and he went and categorized, calculated, defined every single Carolina Bay.
Okay.
And you'll often see in, casual mentions of them that there are 500,000 of them, but we've only gotten to 55,000. And they're all pointing. So if you see up there in the north, they're just a little bit more west. And if you look down in the south, they're pointing north. And that's like a blood spatter pattern. That says that these things are somehow drawn from a particular location. Right?
So you're
it's
saying
not random.
So in that top up by like the Great Lakes where that center piece is, that central spot is, are you saying is the idea that a large comet hit there and then debris is like shot out and hit the Carolina Bays?
Precisely, Dr. Jones.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so you call them secondary impacts. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that it kicked something into the Carolinas. So what did it kick into the Carolinas? And also Nebraska and Kansas. And Dr. West and I were the first to note those in LIDAR and said, holy shit, they're all over Kansas and Nebraska, and they point back the other way. They're pointing to the same place.
Pointing towards that center impact area.
Exactly. And so, where were we?
Are there any are those the only ones you found? You would think there would be more in that there's a big empty area in like the bottom left.
Excellent question. It's the nature of the soil there, that in the Carolinas, this sand, it's a sandy coastal plain all up the East Coast. And that's an important component. And you have that same with a shallow groundwater table, all right? So it's sand with water immediately beneath it. Same thing out there in Nebraska, right? That it's a sandy soil. So where you don't see them, where there might have been things that landed, are the red clay country of Arkansas, right? It's not sand. It would have eroded or otherwise not shown itself as clearly, is the idea.
Okay.
So it only shows up in sandy soils. And it's a mystery wrapped in an enigma stuck deep in a black box.
So what is the conventional theory on these things? Like if you ask academic geologists what happened and what the explanation is for those Carolina bays, what do they say?
Yeah, actually, let me stick with the extraordinary explanation, and then I'll shift to that. That it was proposed in the journal Geology by a good friend, Antonio Zamora, who's also kind of a citizen scientist like myself, but he managed to get it published in Geology. And he proposed, I think it was 2015, I could be wrong, he wrote a paper that said what happened was, his hypothesis was that a fragment of a comet, or say an asteroid, slammed into the ice sheet above Michigan at that time. So there was up to 2 miles of ice that covered everything 13,000 years ago. And that it excavated immediately, blew out into the lower atmosphere gigantic chunks of ice, as crazy as that sounds. Okay? Mm-hmm. And those hypersonic ice boulder chunks is what was launched. But immediately prior to that, he calculated that it would have caused a tremendous earthquake that would have shook that sandy soil with a low water table, and that liquefies sand. You can go and see earthquakes in Japan where cars will just have the bumper showing and it'll just be sand. Because if you have liquefied sand, like water and sand, and then you shake it, it becomes like quicksand and things dump into it. So it would have shaken the ground, and then the boulder would have landed on it, excavated out the bay-like feature, and all of them are perfect ellipses in the Carolinas, mathematical ellipses, which suggest a cone. An ellipse is created by a cone. If you take like the dunce cap and pass it through a flat plane, it leaves an ellipse. That same pressure wave came down and caused those perfect ellipses. So that's the Zamora hypothesis, and that's way out there on the edge and not accepted by the mainstream. What does the mainstream tell you? They say it is the Aeolian lacustrine solution hypothesis. And red flags go up right away. If you're a scientifically minded person, you're like, well, they had to come up with 3 different processes to get there. Aeolian, lacustrine,
what's that
and
mean
solution.
in English?
Yeah. Aeolian means wind. Lacustrine means lake. Mm-hmm. And solution means dissolve, I believe. And so what they're saying, what the mainstream tells us, is that there were powerful winds being swept off the glaciers during the ice ages. And in 4 different periods, I think, is the way the mainstream kind of goes with it now, because they did some dating on them. They said they were created at different times, some up to several thousand years apart, up to 10,000 years apart. It happened again. That these winds came down and blew puddles into perfect ellipses, right? That wind, water, and sand creates an ellipse. Now, or, a circular depression.
What is this, Stephen?
So George was talking about how if you shake sand, it'll liquefy. And this is,
right.
I mean, it literally says liquefying with liquefaction. So I guess that's the process.
Awesome,
but this is an earthquake that has liquefied the ground to the point that the vehicles have sunk into it.
And of course, that ground is hard now. You could walk right out there. It's just the fact that when you shake the hell out of it and you got sand and water, it turns into just a slush.
Oh, wow.
Right? So you would have had that slush because the earthquake hit, and then the boulders landed into it, and it splashed out the bays. Now, that's an extraordinary hypothesis. Many may reject it, but I reject the fact that if you just take wind and blow it on these features, it would have created 55,000 perfectly elliptical lakes, all pointed the same direction, despite being separated in their creation times by tens of thousands of years. So think of that. They're 55,000. They say they formed in 4 different periods. Why in the hell, 10,000 years later, would those winds conspire to put it in the same direction again? Or did it go take all the previous bays and reorient them? Right? It seems like if it was done in 4 different periods, you would be able to say, well, here's genetic class 1, here's class 2, here's class 3. You can tell their time of when they were created because the winds were slightly different. But those winds, according to the mainstream, conspired each time.
To be exactly the same.
To be exactly the same. And I have a lot of trouble with that. Where I go with the bays personally Well, first of all, I call them the kooky caboose of the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis, because we included them in the first paper because we had some intriguing evidence. But it was not the best evidence, and we quickly found much more evidence, much better evidence. And when you're making a case in a scientific publication, it's a little bit like a courtroom. You try to bring in your best evidence, and that doesn't mean everything that you know about the case you're going to say, because some of it might be sketchier than others. So when we had much better evidence and some new people on the team that weren't comfortable with the bays, all cool, we dropped them off. But they've hung to the train of the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis as the kooky caboose that you can't quite let go, that will always be connected to it. And the public will speculate, which is entirely appropriate, but just as a matter of, scientific efficiency, we leave them out of the subject now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, can we find a photo in Russia from Tunguska where we can see an aerial photo and that compares the bays in North Carolina to the impact in Russia? Is there any similarity?
Well, there are not many of them, and I don't know. No one has ever paid too much attention. They do come up with crater, doesn't it? But there's that one intriguing picture there on the right.
They're like an aerial photo.
Yeah, they're
just one.
Yeah, they generally show that same picture, but you can. And hey, this is my speculation. You don't even find this in Zamora's papers and stuff. I just always thought it was odd that when Kulik went out there, he immediately dug in what I believe he termed a number of neat oval bogs. Now, maybe the situation was there that they regrew and some are still evident, whatnot. In other words, the forest regrew. Who knows? But he went out there and did the exact same thing that in the 1930s people were doing in the Carolinas, which is look in neat oval bogs for rocks that weren't there because it just didn't happen the way that it seemed. So I found it very, very intriguing. And like I say, I kind of passed the baton. So I was the bay nut from about 97. Then my name got associated with Google. So for years, I would come up with Carolina bays and people contacted me and all that stuff. But in 2005, these other scientists contacted me and we published in 2007. And then that initiated what has been at least 40 or 50 papers from our side and, close to 200 total back and forth, trying to argue, debate, whatnot.
That top left one is wild, how perfectly circular that is.
Yeah, I took that picture, actually.
Did you really?
I did. Sticking my head out of a Cessna. And,
wow, look at that, man.
Yeah. Well,
awesome.
How did Wynn do that?
That's nice to see somebody else pick up that picture. Yeah, Wynn didn't do that. First of all, there's a wonderful fellow. He was a lawyer in Sumter, South Carolina, who wrote a book called The Mysterious Carolina Bays, Henry Savage. And like I say, it's, kind of a legal thing. What's your evidence and whatnot? And he called bullshit on the wind-water hypothesis. He said, just no way. And one of the things he said, anybody familiar with a southern wetland of tangled vines and trees and herbaceous shrubs and all that stuff knows that immediately you're not going to get a whole lot of formation of stuff. If you're wet, you're going to kind of stay where you are. It's kind of hard to blow that around. Now, that said, you did have different conditions 20,000 years ago, but they're certainly not forming now. My bottom line is that the Carolina Bays were all created at once. Whatever in hell made that did not occur again and again over thousands and thousands of years. I think it is plainly obvious, at least to myself, that they all occurred at once. So what the hell happened?
So, and additionally, I know Randall talks about what you just mentioned when the ice sheet was hit. It carried massive pieces of ice all across the continent. And there's evidence of rocks that were frozen inside of those pieces of ice that show up like in the Scablands or like the northwestern part of the United States.
Yeah.
Rocks that are from a completely another part. They're native to a completely separate part, like northern Canada.
That's right.
Where it was in Canada.
And they were rafted down there in the floods.
Right.
That's right. And they're left behind as giant erratic boulders.
Yeah, like how else would those rocks have ended up there? Random rocks.
Yeah, well, even the mainstream will tell you that's
and they're
catastrophic in a sense. I mean, they're the size of houses, and they had to be carried by an iceberg the size of an aircraft carrier.
Right.
right? See that photo there on the left, one off the top left? It's of Michigan. There you go.
This one. Okay.
Blow that up. So that's where they all point back to is Saginaw Bay,
Oh.
right? Which is the thumb of Michigan, or the between the thumb and the hand, right? See how there's a divot over there? See how Michigan's like a hand, right?
Yep.
And then you've got Saginaw Bay up there
Right.
in the northeast.
Right.
Well, that's what they all point to. Kind of interesting to see that it's a big divot in the landscape. It's like something was excavated. And of course, it's not a crater, but you had 2 miles of ice protecting it.
Right.
So could it be that whatever hell occurred that day when it slammed into that location, that's the remnant scar of what happens when you hit a mile-thick ice sheet with a hypersonic bullet from space? That the ice shatters and scatters, and then you are left with what now is kind of the Saginaw Bay feature. So that's the kind of intriguing stuff that they didn't go to Saginaw Bay and then draw lines to the bays. What they did was drew lines off of the long axis of the bays and then look, well, where did it point? Holy shit. It points to a place that actually looks like something kind of strange happened.
Do we think that there were any catastrophic impacts between 13,000 years ago and now?
We do.
Like closer to us?
We do. And
When was that?
That was for our group. There are plenty of people who speculate on this stuff and published, but our group published a paper in 2021 that came up. That was the one they were knocking there, giving grief, where we investigated, and I went over there as the first person from the Comet Research Group to the site. I got a call from another British catastrophist, Tweedy gentleman, Phil Clapham. And Clapham said, George, I'm in touch with a biblical archaeology group in the Jordan Valley who believe they found Sodom. And I said, is this out of a damn movie?
What is a biblical archaeology group?
That means that there are people of faith that are following archaeological practices and operating as archaeologists, but they're believers, right? And there's always been a substantial threat of that. And in fact, they were the first archaeologists in the Middle East, right?
Oh, really?
That they went over there as faithful people, digging to prove their book. Since then, so I joined them on a dig. It's not particularly...
Write that down, biblical archaeologist. That'll be our title.
It's a tough mix, man. It's a tough mix of cultures, and they carry a big load because they have to both stay true to science while at the same time true to their faith. And I think you can balance those things, or at least you can tell if they're squirreling it. And it doesn't do them any good to go and change data and whatnot, which we were accused of, in support of the Bible. Your interpretation may be different. But so I got a call from this fellow, so I'm in touch with Biblical Archaeology Group. And they are fine archaeologists and have been digging Tal el-Hammam for, I think at that time, 15 seasons. So you go out once a year and they would take 50 or 60 people over a month and a half, generally in February, to the Middle East, and you dig your ass off and work like a damn mule to dig and excavate at Tal el-Hammam. So they've been doing that for years, and he said, and they have found a burn layer a couple of meters down. So a burn layer, again, it's kind of like that black mat, that they found a layer of destruction that indicates that the city there at Tal el-Hammam was absolutely pounded. Everything broken. Pieces of pottery on one side, some of them are melted at extremely high temperatures, right? But they didn't know all that. They didn't know the forensic part of it because they were Levantine archaeologists. You know, they didn't do the geochemistry and the microscope work. They don't. So I went over there. In the first year, I was about 50% digging with the rest of the gang, but then I had some real leash, and I was allowed to just walk around Tal el-Hammam and collect samples and see what I could see, blah, blah, blah. So we shipped all this stuff back to the U.S. Then the next year, I was joined for people who are skeptical of a civilian like me doing this stuff. Believe me, they'll put the scientists on you. But I did the initial work. And then the next year, I came back with an archaeologist, PhD, a rocket scientist, and an MD. And as part of the Comet Research Group, and we got more samples. Then they spent 6 years writing the scientific paper, and it came out in 2021. And it was a pretty big deal. It was published in Nature, and it provided evidence in support of the Genesis passages concerning Sodom and Gomorrah. And I have no doubt that, personally, that site is Sodom. And that's separate from just the impact evidence. There's a lot of other biblical evidence that suggests that the lost city of Sodom has now been found by Dr. Stephen Collins in Trinity Southwest University. And that's a Christian school in Albuquerque. So I dug with them, and we published that paper, and it has become arguably the most downloaded, popular, read scientific publication in Nature. Last time I checked, it had over 500,000 downloads and views. And I think what that is the generally sometimes woke, but atheist scientific types that are pissed off that something made it into Nature that suggests that there's biblical truth. So they're furtively going on there and reading that paper going, the bastards, they never should have let that one through. And then they're the people of faith who say, oh my gosh, there's something in Nature that provides proof to, our stories. And they go read it. And then there are other just science nuts. So you take those groups together, and it's a very popular paper. And they had to have it.
Is this the paper that got 800,000 downloads?
Yeah.
A Tunguska-sized airburst destroyed Tel Al-Hammam, a Middle Bronze Age city in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
And when did this airburst? When did this happen?
3,700 years ago.
Wow.
So 1,700 BC. And that was during the time, if there was an Old Testament, that is the time period which is being testified to.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about the site that I thought was fascinating, I'd read the book. Dr. Collins wrote a fantastic book people can get on the whole story. It's a little dated now because they've discovered a lot else, and this paper came out. But it was like mentioned in the side on the book, and people talked on the side of the thing. They said, well, it's well established that Tel Al-Hammam was the last campsite of the Israelites. So that area around that mound is called Abel Shittim, the Field of Acacias, which is kind of interesting right there. Acacias have DMT and all that, right? It's called the Field of Acacias. And it's always been accepted as if there was an Exodus, that was the last campsite. And that area is kind of promoted as such. And when you dig at it, you look over your shoulder. Well, you look straight ahead to the Jordan River, which is about 6-7 miles away. And then another 6 or 7 miles away is Jericho, the oldest city in the world. And that's where the Israelites, that's when they went into Israel, and they sent the spies to Jericho, and it's all spelled out in the Bible. But the place that they did that from was clearly Tel Al-Hammam, because when you look over behind yourself digging at that site, you're sitting at the foot of Mount Nebo, and there's the monastery up there that is the site where Moses looked out on the promised land. So he finished his 40-year journey. He never entered Israel, but at the foot of the mountain is where they would have entered the promised land, and where they would have established the tabernacle, I believe, and all of this stuff. So the ark sat on Tel Al-Hammam, which is a hell of a second act. That was 700 years after the destruction, if it all be true.
Right.
I'm like, that's just a hell of a place to both be Sodom and the last place the ark sat until they moved to Jerusalem.
Who was the guy who led some big research project, the guy who claimed he discovered the ark, and he was like digging up all this ancient wood? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I forget his name, but when I was studying this stuff cllosely, Ron Wyatt, maybe?
Ron Wyatt.
See,
is this where he found it?
No.
Okay.
And thank goodness.
Right.
This has all been done in a academic context. This is serious archaeology out there. Now, they're people of faith, but I've seen the way they operate. They're not sitting there deliberately trying to skew things to prove their book. Yeah, that's from the top of Tal el-Amarna. Cool. And where people like Wyatt and stuff were, popular communicators to Christian audiences and trying to get their eyeballs. And maybe he's right about some stuff, maybe he's not right about some stuff, but he's no archaeologist. And actually, the place where if you ask people of faith, and I've actually become a better Christian since this, and I go to a Bible study these days. And if somebody told me that 10 years ago, I never believed it. But the other day, we were moving through Sodom right now and moving through Genesis. And it had in the footnotes of the Bible, when the guys read, they said, well, Sodom is supposed to be, according to our people, Christian historians and whatnot, south of the Dead Sea. So all the faithful argue against this, because not all of them, but that Dr. Collins and that team, they get pushback first from the other Christians. Even though it's the best example of science in support of the book that's ever been, that Christians that are into this stuff were raised to believe that it was south of the Dead Sea, because an old starch-collared biblical archaeologist of the 20s, now I think it's F.W. Albright or something from Kansas, who had gone over there to tell everybody that the Bible was true, he pegged it, for whatever series of reasons, as being south of the Dead Sea. Okay, that's important. And this is what Dr. Collins has explained very, very well, and I can't even imitate it. But what he gives textual evidence from the Bible that says that where Lot went and moved his sheep and all this kind of stuff is well watered as in Egypt. Well, first of all, south of the Dead Sea is the most forbidding dry desert on planet Earth. It's the Sinai and the Negev. I mean, nobody moves their sheep down there. But if you're north of the Dead Sea, where this is, today.
Would it have been the same back then?
Well, just like Egypt was green 5,000 years ago, but probably not 3,000 years ago, right? And it doesn't meet other geographical clues that they give in the Bible. If you follow all the stuff and reverse engineer it as Collins did, and think of it without the presumptions of Albright and the Christians, and without the presumptions of the mainstream that it's all bullshit, Collins looked at it with a new face, and he said, geographically, based on what they're saying here in the Bible, I think well watered as in Egypt, it's referring to the Nile Delta. So you have the river comes up and then it goes into a delta into the Mediterranean. The same thing happens with the River Jordan as it goes in the Dead Sea. It has a delta, or used to, now it's destroyed. But that was the well watered as in Egypt. It's just like, except it's upside down. It's just like Egypt there. It's like a miniature Egypt. And it's lush and green, and they still grow tomatoes and bananas and weed. Hell, I was up on the top of the thing and saw these like 3 or 4 fires at the farms down below. And I was like, what are they doing out there?
Growing pot?
And they said, oh, the police came in. Those are raids. And they said that's where most of your Middle Eastern weed is grown, in that view, where you can see Jerusalem, Jericho, and whatnot. But that's the weed area, right? And I said, no shit. But
you're saying this was about 3,000 years, about 1,000 BC?
1700. Yep.
Okay. So are there any, do you think that was the only impact during that time? Or do you think there's other evidence of other impacts around the world during that same time? Like, assuming that we passed through
that same time,
the Torrid meteor stream when that happened, and maybe there's some other archaeological sites that we can look at that date to 3,000 years ago?
Absolutely. And there's only one team in the world doing it, which is ours. I mean, if you went and looked and used a slight fraction of the forensic and archaeological and investigative expertise that is available to modern science and looked for these things and took it seriously, hell, you could knock it out in a year. They need to go all around the world. You could, for $10 million National Science Foundation grant, you could go rule this thing in or out by going to shallow grading soils around the world and testing their geochemistry. A key thing about, I didn't talk about the geochemistry.
But like, for example, when you go to some of the spots that you were showing earlier with the black mat in the United States, there's a trash can right here you can throw.
Thank you.
There's no black mat around the 3,000 year ago depth, right? So that was probably only focused in that part of the world.
That's right, Danny. That's right. We don't think that this was a worldwide swarm. So just like Tunguska,
similar to
you might have gotten
exactly.
Right.
Okay.
But there are other indications that we had other bad days. a lot of cultural changes through time may have been forced by catastrophe. That it's not just one slow, steady progression that results in, the naked ape with the black mirror, but actually we get knocked around. But the reason we are the naked ape with the black mirror is because of the Younger Dryas event. And that's the importance of it, because that is well established to be the beginning of modern man and civilization. Right? 13,000 years ago, right after the Younger Dryas, well established that that's when you started gathering into villages, domesticating animals, and growing crops right after that. And I asked the discoverer of the earliest agriculture, who spoke at the Cosmic Summit 2023, coming up June 15th through 17th in just a month, the next edition. But last year, Dr. Andrew Moore, who's in his 70s and has been digging a site or dug a site, Abu Huraira, in the early 70s, where he discovered the earliest agriculture. And he later was the most recent outgoing president of the American Archaeological Institute. He's a top archaeologist. He believes there was a catastrophe 13,000 years ago because at his site where he discovered the earliest agriculture, he found evidence for impact with us. And he had been studying that site since 1972. And when he saw the data, he said, these people are onto something. And he has now joined our team, publishes, lead on the papers, and that's the kind of scientist you need. That's exactly the kind of guy. And, it takes some courage, but it doesn't take a lot to come back and say, oh, those things that I thought were campfires, that was actually charcoal from the destruction. Right? So he admits his own previous, what he thinks were flawed interpretations based on new data. He looked at it again and said, holy shit, not only did I find evidence for agriculture, I found evidence for catastrophe. So I said, Dr. Moore, how soon after the catastrophe did we start growing crops, which would have been the very first agriculture on Earth? Okay, so we got shocked. We went from plucking pears to pulling plows. Right? Kind of like the Bible says. You went from kind of hanging out in a hunter-gatherer world, right? Where you didn't grow crops and didn't have sheep and all that. You just kind of lived off the land. And then all of a sudden we kind of, it seems the impact shocked us into a different way of life. And we started growing crops. So I said, Dr. Moore, how soon after the catastrophe did we start growing the crops at Abu Huraira? He said, immediately, son.
How quick was immediately?
He meant immediately, like you can't distinguish any time period between them. And they find their melted glass on bone. You find that elsewhere too. But there was a bad day at Abu Huraira, the first site of agriculture, and it did something to us. So it turned us, and it turned us ultimately into the technological people we are today. And the society, civilized people, for better or worse, because it was probably pretty nice before then.
So the Younger Dryas lasted, we think, 1,200 years total, right?
That's right.
Now, during that 1,200-year span, were we constantly getting bombarded by cosmic impacts? Or was there only one in the beginning and the end?
We don't know.
Okay.
I suspect, and others suspect, that it was a period of increased activity. And in fact, that we may have had increased activity and impact, say that chunky part of the Taurid meteor stream, we're still hitting it twice a year. Maybe we had a series of bad interactions over a couple of hundred years, right?
And then
and they could have lasted, maybe they tailed off over 1,000. We don't know, but we do know that the end of the Younger Dryas was every bit as dramatic as the beginning. In fact, almost more so. That we pop out of a long period of climate wildness. Then we have the Younger Dryas. You have a long period of climate wildness. I can show you some graphs. And then
all of a sudden, the climate warms up.
And then it warms up overnight. It's like somebody's going to make a movie out of this one day. It's a 3-part story. You've got the people before, then they struggle in the middle, and then the sun rises in a day and God makes it all right again, or whomever, right? And then the strangest thing to me, and that then the climate stabilizes till now.
Right.
It is unbelievably quiescent in the last 13,000 years relative to the previous 300 or 400,000.
Right.
So it's spiky as shit and wild, right?
Yeah, can you show a graph that shows the climate for the last, whatever it is, 100,000 years or something like that?
Certainly can, sir.
And I'm like, do we know why as soon as the Younger Dryas ended, the temperature shot back up? Because so during the whole Younger Dryas period, it was cold, right?
That's right. Cold as shit. Let me get to... There you go.
Okay. Younger Dryas, it plunges down.
Okay, here's the big picture.
And at the end, it gets even colder.
Right. And this is going back, Danny, what's it say there? 400,000 years.
Okay.
And it starts as kind of counterintuitive. The old stuff is on the right, and then it's getting younger as you go to the left.
Okay.
So I actually should just run this slide or it's going to look confusing.
Okay, here we go. That's 400,000 years.
Yep. And then it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And then you have the YD there at the end.
What is that YD?
See,
that's Younger Dryas. Okay, got it.
Line.
Yeah.
Yeah. But here's the thing, and you asked a good question over dinner last night. And I said, well, I think I can answer this tomorrow. You need some visuals. But I think you were heading towards, well, boy, that looks really wild back there. What's different about the Younger Dryas? Right? Mm-hmm. What distinguishes it from those other wild ones? Well, first of all, it was a pretty good dip. So it was a good dip in and of its own in comparison to its others that preceded it. But none of those animals went extinct. Those same animals lived through that 400,000 years. Mm. And then in that final dip, you lose 200 species, 55 genera of animals.
That red line, that's the beginning of the Younger Dryas or the end of the Younger Dryas?
Damn near both.
Oh, so it's just like the whole period.
Yeah. Let me see. What's the next slide here?
At the start of East...
Massive explosions, intense firestorms, habitat destruction, toxic chemicals, sudden climate change. What about humans? And this is interesting. Mm-hmm. So I'm a North Carolinian, but I love the southern state, South Carolina, and you can see that is records of Clovis points, these wonderful spear points that came from these people. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that's every Clovis point that's been recorded in South Carolina. Okay? And then after the Younger Dryas, you never see another Clovis point. So their Clovis people are gone. But you still see spear points, but it changes to what archaeologists would say a different technology.
How is it different?
That it's just a different kind of arrowhead that you don't see. They don't make them like this no more. Mm-hmm. They call them redstones. But see how few of those there are? So it seems like there was a population collapse. That there are a lot of Clovis points and many fewer redstones. So is that a proxy for population? I don't know. Maybe they didn't need arrowheads as much and wanted to change their technology. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But it suggests that that humans had a very bad day too.
Right.
And then there are all sorts of other weird stuff, man. I tell you one that a lot of people don't know about. And, there's so many people becoming educated on this stuff, which is wonderful. I remember when everybody that knew about this could fit in a car. And in fact, sometimes we did. And now, because of Rogan and yourself and all the wonderful communicators, just watched it blossom. But where am I heading? I'm getting romantic there with watching all this over the last 17 years. Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. But the human population collapse is a very. Here's another one. Points were Clovis to Redstone. So those are Clovis on the right. So you've got 8-1 Clovis in Virginia to Redstone, 5-1. So it just seems like there were many fewer people.
It looks pretty similar, though.
Yeah.
One looks smoother.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. A paper came out. So a lot of people are getting educated on this. So I want to throw in some new stuff. One is that a paper came out a couple of years ago. It must have had 30, 40 authors on it. It's a genetics paper. And it said that they had determined that 13,000 years ago, the composition of males to females changed. So what's the composition today? It's like 52, 48. I think there are a few more gals than guys. All right. But you always think it's 50-50. During the Younger Dryas, during that period, it went to, I believe the number is 17 women for every man.
Right.
How the hell did that happen? What kind of weird world? And why did it change things that way? If we're right about our thing, and if we're not right about our thing, what the hell happened? Why would...
Would it be from maybe hunting or fighting?
Yeah, there's some indication that stress and cold may change the composition of boys to girls. But they also says the paper's interesting. What does it do?
Combat.
This is just the genes, that there were literally 17 times more men than women, or women than men. So yeah, there's just a lot still to be learned. It's still coming out, and those people were not interested in proving the Younger Dryas impact, but it helps provide an explanation for the data that they're getting.
So is the idea that the more women survived than men?
No, that something would have changed the balance of births from women to men. Let me see if I can find that paper. So it's been a while since I've done this, but I think is a proxy for what happened.
Okay.
The transition to
human reproductive bottleneck related to the Younger Dryas cooling event.
That's right.
Okay.
Right, and that's in their paper. So what they're saying is that it started. So you can see there's a little bit at one. So that our very bad day
was right there.
And then it starts going down. Mm-hmm. So there are more women to men. I believe that's the way
so before the Younger Dryas, this was an ice age?
We were coming out of an ice age. In fact, right before the Younger Dryas, I've heard it said that it was pretty much like it is now. All right? And then we
But way more ice.
But way more ice, exactly. That there was a lot of ice still left over. And believe it or not, it takes a long time for that stuff to melt. Mm-hmm. So it could be just as warm. Well, we've got Greenland today. You've got places that aren't especially cold, but are still got a couple of miles of ice on them, right?
Right.
I mean, they're cold. But yeah, so it was pretty much like today. And then temperatures drop, 15 to 20 degrees in the northern hemisphere almost overnight. And then that changed the male to female composition, and then it plummets not long after. Now, this is not the Comet Research Group's data or interpretation. This is just, me, pajama scientists and whatnot.
Okay.
But a lot of people notice that. But they could have attributed it, or at least included our hypothesis as perhaps a cause, but we're kind of radioactive. The Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis is verboten, in many laboratories because it's so radical. So they don't bring us up. But what do they attribute it to? And this blew my mind. Innovations in transportation technology, e.g. the invention of the wheel, horse, and camel domestication, and open water sailing. Now, those are interesting developments in humans. The thing is, they all happened 6,000-7,000 years after this. So basically, they're supporting Graham Hancock. They're saying that 13,000 years ago, or immediately thereafter, that we were open water sailing. Well, hell, that's more radical than saying there was an impact. So I don't know how, particularly given all of the authors on this thing.
They're saying when I'm sorry, I'm confused. When did they say the open water sailing and the wheel started?
Then.
When?
13,000 years ago, whenever the drop came. They're attributing this, so at least more than...
It happened at the beginning or the end?
Yeah, this would have been kind of right at the end. That's when it starts. So I don't know how long that is. That's to 10,000 years ago. So then it drops dramatically after that. So what they're saying is that dramatic drop 10,000 years ago would have been due to open water sailing, the invention of the wheel. And
I'm sorry. I'm thinking that graph was climate. That graph is population.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or their main point, what the balance of girls and boys was.
Go back up. I want to look at that graph.
God, I'm feeling weak on this one. I wish I'd read it before we came in a minute ago.
Scroll a little bit down. So go back to that colored graph we were just looking at.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Southeast and East Asia is the blue, and this is population, or this is region. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, human reproductive bottleneck related to the Younger Dryas. So this is just overall.
I guess it's decline in population and also
And
the
reproduction.
change. Yeah, because you're not going to have as many people if you go through many generations of 17 women to one man.
It's
Right.
interesting that the Africans didn't drop until way after. Everybody else uniformly dropped together.
Yeah, excellent, Steve. Yeah.
Africa didn't really get hit too bad, right? Because a lot of
right.
the bigger animals survived in Africa.
Exactly. And think of this. What of an insult it is to those hunters that there's still elephants around. If the Clovis people could come in and in 250 years take out every mammoth, not to mention an armadillo the size of a golf cart, who the hell eats the last one of
Bears,
those?
saber-toothed tigers.
Exactly, the short-faced cave bear. Who goes in while there is still a squirrel anywhere that you could go and kill and eat? Why would you go eat the last short-faced bear?
Right.
Or the last glyptodon. I mean, people don't eat armadillos today. The hungriest man in South America doesn't eat armadillos, right? But we ate every single last one of them. That's absolutely, preposterous.
Right.
So big changes during this period. And you see that throughout science. You can see paper after paper after paper describing incredible things that happened 13,000 years ago. The problem is they just don't have what are to some an incredible answer. There's an equally astonishing answer.
Something happened. It was like in the Congress or something, or a Senate hearing where there was a guy from the head of NASA was saying that China was about to research the dark side of the moon or something like that. And they asked him, like, if we knew anything. He's like, oh, no, we haven't studied any of that stuff. But we're going to let China do it or something. Did you see that?
No, I know that I just saw yesterday they've come out with the best lunar atlas now. Like China's got the best map of the moon. And I'm sure that includes, and they did send a probe to the other side, not, last year. So China is looking at the other side. And why is there an other side? Danny, one thing that I like point out about the moon, and I learned this subsequently or heard it again from Randall and other people like Malcolm Bendall, but I had even kind of discovered it 20, 30 years ago. I saw pointed out that, there depends on how you count them, say 209 moons in the solar system. If you went and looked at all the moons around every planet, because some of them have multiple ones. So there are a bunch of them. None of them, as would be expected mathematically, perfectly occlude the sun. They do not have eclipses.
Do we know that for a fact?
Yeah, because
How do we know that?
Because you know the size of the object. So you know if you're on Jupiter, right, and you're looking at, and you measure Callisto, a moon of Jupiter, or is that Saturn? God, I'm going to make mistakes outside of my. That if that's pretty easy to figure out, that thing is that size, would it cover the sun perfectly?
Right.
No, right? And mathematically, just think about it. There's no, what's the likelihood of one object that's in front of you, between you and another object, being perfectly matching it? In other words, and this is what causes it, the moon is 1/400th the diameter of the sun. So you stretch out 400 moons, you'd have the diameter of the sun. But the sun is 400 times further away. Those are exact. Those two numbers needed to meet to make it right in the middle, right?
Talk about hitting the lottery.
Exactly, Danny. Exactly. So the likelihood of any one object doing that, it's much more likely it's going to be a tad bigger, a tad smaller, a shitload bigger, shitload smaller. But ours, for whatever reason, and it also always faces us, that's not always the case either. In fact, I don't think it's the case in any of them. We've got an unusual moon.
Are you saying that all the other moons rotate? Or ours rotates, but in a way that it always faces
that
us.
weird way
Tidally
that
locked.
Tidally locked.
Yeah,
there you go, Steve. Exactly. And I do not believe that is the case in the other ones. But I know that none of them perfectly occluded. So we are the only planet that enjoys an eclipse.
Yeah.
Kind of makes you think somebody put it there.
So I don't want to watch this whole 3-minute video. What is the fuss all about with this?
We are using commercial enterprises to bear the cost of landers of which we put NASA instruments that in effect, become scouts for us before we ever send our astronauts to that part of the moon. Now, is that what your question is?
Yeah, we're trying to get at what's the Chinese are doing, you think, on the backside of the moon. Do you have any insights in that?
They are going to have a lander on the far side of the moon, which is the side that's always in dark. We're not planning to go there.
Now, it's not always in dark,
and
though.
What's the benefit of doing so?
We don't know what's on the backside of the moon, so that would be something that they would discover. But our decision is that it's more profitable for us to go to the south pole of the moon because we think that's where the water is.
So why do you think they made that decision? I'm curious.
I have no idea.
Right. So we know China's doing something, and we're not going to try to beat them to it.
That seemed to define the term willful ignorance, where you're like, no, I just don't want to know.
Right. When have we ever done that in the history of this country?
That's creepy stuff, man. And it got him on his heels there.
Yeah.
He didn't have a ready answer. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe something's over there.
Yeah, man, the moon is a mystery.
It is. It is. And I mean, I remember seeing as a 6-year-old a moon landing and then growing up thinking, we had space in 1999 and we were all I'm just old enough to remember back when we thought that we were going to populate the damn solar system in my lifetime. And shit.
Yeah, we went stagnant.
Just nothing's happened, man. And I found that all very odd. Yeah, something doesn't add up.
Yeah, man, it's super weird. Randall seems to know a lot about that. He didn't really want to talk about it too much when he came on here, though.
Yeah, I hope I didn't overtalk, but I do know that he finds the moon significant. And it used to be the Younger Dryas event, and UFOs had absolutely nothing to do with each other. And now you hear it. You know, is it a breakaway civilization? Mm-hmm. Is it somebody who got the hell out of there that had a lot of capabilities, but they just didn't have the capability to stave off that day, or they left, it happened, and we are somehow an intended result? I don't know. But we are from it, and now we're looking back, discovering it, and at the same time finding out about the people who may have broken camp and gotten away. I don't know. That's pure speculation.
Yeah.
But,
well, there's also like we look for planets that are just like ours that we imagine that would inhabit life, right? But there's way more water worlds out there than there are planets like ours in the Goldilocks zone or whatever that have like, the perfect amount of oxygen or whatever. And it would be far likely that if there was another species or alien species that was on another planet, it would likely be adapted and live in a water world. And, a lot of these like recent UFO sightings have shown these submergible vehicles or these vehicles that can traverse mediums. That they come out of the ocean and then go back into the ocean and disappear. And if they were hiding here, that would be the best place for them to hide because that's the one place that's been explored. We've only explored like I think it's like 17% of all the ocean floor.
Well, let's not get into that Dibble Hancock thing. Boy, they went over that percentage of.
Oh my God, yeah.
And Graham was kind of way off on his. He said 1% has been explored. Well, that's 30,000 acres, and no one's excavated 30,000 acres. If you call it explored or studied, he was way off on that. So yeah, we've studied virtually none of the Sahara and virtually none of the oceans. And hell yes, if somebody was hiding out, if they wanted to hide, that would be the place to do it. But I'm also, if not a pajama scientist already out of my way over my skis, I'm also a radical panspermist. And have you ever come across the term panspermia?
Yeah. It's the idea that rocks or meteorites from somewhere else hit here and that they contained biological material. Yeah.
And then the radical part is where I am. But I come by it honestly. I'm pretty good friends. Actually, I'm very good friends and have been for over a decade with the world's most prominent panspermist. And he is coming. You will meet him at the Cosmic Summit, Dr. Chandra Wickramasinghe. All right. And he is a I think, the world's greatest living scientist. And one way you can tell that is you don't know his name. But if you go back and look, he published 70 papers in Nature from 1970 to about 82 or so with Sir Fred Hoyle, who was the greatest scientist of the 20th century in Great Britain. And they were at Cambridge, and Chandra was actually so intelligent that the Queen gave him a scholarship, an Empire scholarship, to come from Sri Lanka as a boy. And he got on a steamship and was delivered to England as one of the most intelligent people in the Empire. They had like a scholarship program. So England ruled the world, and they say, who's the smartest ones out there? We'll let them come to Cambridge or Oxford. So Chandra was able to as a young boy, and he was kind of delivered into the hands of Sir Fred Hoyle. And they, Fred had defined how the sun works, and then they discovered and published that what was cosmic dust out there, gigantic dust clouds out in interstellar space, that dust was actually organic molecules, right? Which is as they say, and I hate this term, the building blocks of life. That's all that what do you call them? Astrobiologists. Well, they're always looking for the building blocks of life. They're never looking for life. Always building blocks. So, and they defined that and said, holy cow, well, this stuff is not just dust. It's not little pieces of graphite. It's actually, carbon-based molecules, just like life is. And then it stopped there. Their changing of what we understand is out there, but they didn't stop. Fred and Chandra went on and said, we went and took the spectra, and Steve, you might search Mustafa spectra panspermia. Mustafa, that's right, and we'll see if we can get it. They went and looked at one and then images. Yes, sir. Oh, God. Okay, put in, I hate to do this to you, but put in Hoyle instead of Wickramasinghe.
Wait, instead of what?
Yeah, I'm going to find it. Yeah, Hoyle. What they did.
Hoyle or Hoya?
Hoyle. There it is. Okay, see that little graph on the second row?
Second row.
Far right?
Far right. Yeah, that's Comet Halley. They also did it to other places.
Okay.
Okay, is that, I can't quite see. But the other ones, what they did is they tested the spectra from interstellar clouds, and they match E. coli, among other things. Bacteria. Exactly. So you've got the spectra there of bacteria laying upon the spectra. There you go. The prediction for bacteria.
Yeah.
And then the light that they see from these giant clouds. Well, what are the odds that it matches? So then they said, that's life. And then people were all of a sudden, oh, you can have life in space. No, man, no. We're not talking about little. There are huge classes, and we discover more and more of microorganisms that have the ability to survive incredible conditions, that streamophiles. And first of all, why the hell would evolution endow them with the ability to survive the vacuum of space and radiation, et cetera, and so forth? But they go into hibernation. Not only that, so they could be out there in a just add water and warmth environment, and it would come back. But I could take you even further. So that's way out there in interstellar space, and maybe you have grains of life out there, which is unbelievable enough and not accepted. But Chandra maintains that it's everywhere in space. Okay, that it is coming in every day, all the time. And here's how. That if you're a speck, and that Comet Halley, for instance, that all comets are seething, boiling, viral containers. Wow. That they're absolutely full of life. And then as they shed dust particles, which float into the atmosphere all the time, and that's all well accepted, little particles, always dust coming in from comets, that within those dust particles, that's how the life is protected, right? Now, it's not living necessarily at the moment, but the dust particle is 100,000 times larger, let's say, literally on those scales, than a virus. and that viruses are raining down on the earth constantly, and that evolution, Darwinian evolution, is certainly a big factor and a starting point, but that evolution has been guided by transmissions of outside molecular DNA from space, which is coming in all the time. And in fact, most viral outbreaks are the result. The 1918 Spanish influenza. People were infected in Boston on the same day as Bombay. Well, they didn't have jets back then.
Really?
Yeah. You can't shake hands that fast, right? That there are all sorts of things like that, right? And they wrote paper after paper in Nature, and none of them were adequately refuted, but it was never accepted that life is absolutely omnipotent. You can't get away from it. And I'll give you a great example. The Russians, I'll give you a good one here, Steve. We'll get right to it. Cosmic Tusk, ISS, like International Space Station, Plankton. Cosmic Tusk, which is my website. Mm-hmm. The Russians took, you think they'd have a different kind of specialty tool, but a tampon, and swiped that big tourist window on the space station. They got like a big round one where they can kind of hang out and look down at the Earth and stuff. There you go.
Microbes entombed in cosmic dust collected from outside surface of the space station window.
They swiped it, I think, 10 times in 6 years. I forget the exact numbers. Every one of them came back with the scum on the outside of the windshield were diatoms, the little...
Oh, diatoms.
Yeah. Bacteria, viruses, diatomaceous plankton, tardigrades, fungi. That this stuff is raining down more or less constantly. I'm not sure why I put tardigrades in there. But that was an incredible paper. The Russians published this paper that said that we went and tested their scum outside the space station that is clearly life and it's not contaminated. They were very careful with it and whatnot, right? And what are their choices then? Either it came up with, and all of them are incredible.
Chandra published 75 papers in Nature with Sir Fred Hoyle in the 70s and 80s.
That's right. Saying all this.
Ubiquitous microbes in cosmic dust would ultimately be found.
Remember that particle of dust is orders of magnitude larger than the life particle, so it makes a great little spaceship. Think about a spaceship. You're that tiny little virus, and you've got this gigantic dust particle. That's plenty to protect you, right? But then you come into the atmosphere, that stuff flakes off, then it's a free-roaming virus, and it reverse RNAs its way, I guess that's what you call it, into the evolutionary stream. And that's why we get dramatic jumps like the Cambrian explosion, where all of a sudden we went from X number of life forms to 10X number of life forms, right? And things like the octopus came along. And this gets to what you're saying, these water worlds. What Chandra would tell you is that everything we see here had an origin somewhere else, DNA-wise, right? So you see that crazy-looking jellyfish, and you say, how the hell did a baboon and a jellyfish?
Right.
Both, and all of us wonder that. And what they do is the same thing with geology. They say, well, just give it a lot of time.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow.
Yeah, just give it 5 billion years, and we trust us. You can get a jellyfish on one side and a baboon on the other. And you can't really refute that. Okay, I guess enough time, anything can happen. Makes a hell of a lot more sense to me that there is a damn jellyfish world out there, and there is a baboon world out there, and there is a spider world out there, and there's some that are spider heavy and have some baboons, and maybe there's some that baboon, and we're a zoo. We're a zoo of life, not necessarily a unique one by any means, but some planets might be tilted more towards one kind of thing. It might be more insecty, and another one might be more mammals, and so on and so forth. And that soup is constantly coming in. Wow. And here's the greatest thing about that paper. Okay, so then the Russians, and I kept looking, somehow I missed it, but I'm like, God, this is going to make worldwide news. We finally discovered life in space. And because it was reported, plankton found on outside of space station, and then nothing, crickets, just like always on the really important stuff. And then I found out subsequently, it took a few years, they published a paper in 2018 where they said, we've only got two choices here, the Russians did. They said either it came from above or it came from below. They did not think it was contaminated at launch, right? That it wouldn't have stayed, that scum wouldn't have.
Right.
And the thing was inside the space station window, was launched years ago anyway, right? And it's already been going, whatever. So it wasn't on launch. So they said an as yet unidentified mechanism must be whipping, say the diatoms were traced to the Barents Sea. It had the same kind of diatom you find in the Barents Sea up in the northern hemisphere. They said the ocean waves must whip it into the air, and then some kind of, yet to be fully explained, electromagnetic force lifted it 400 kilometers out into space from the Barents Sea, and that's why you find it out there. Or it came from above and life is absolutely fucking everywhere. And they hedged and they kind of went with the other explanation.
Okay.
That there's some mechanism. Well, first of all, if that mechanism is true, it means life's everywhere. It means we're seeding life. It means panspermia is true either way. Either we're sending it out and other people could catch it, or it's coming down and we're getting it. But then it gets even cooler. Then the lead author of the paper that hedged, little noticed, but very serious paper. All these people had access to shit from the space station. These are not pajama scientists. They're serious Russian scientists with access to very special materials. They hedged. Then TV Grabenikova, one of the lead authors, after the hedged paper, immediately published another paper with Chandra and the panspermist crowd and said, basically, bullshit. I don't believe it. I think it came from above. It's the only reasonable answer. So she switched teams. She went from the neutral team to Chandra's team. And Chandra's coming to Greensboro next month. And I think he's 85 years old. And I felt bad I was like, Chandra, do you really want to make this trip, man? Because we can have you virtual. And he's such a cool dude, man. Wow. He's like, I wouldn't miss it for the world. So he's going to give the keynote at the Cosmic Summit, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would make sense that, we're a planet that's packed with life. Why wouldn't we have just tons of microscopic life and bacteria surrounding us?
Yeah.
Right? Like not coming from other places, coming from us. Like, right? If we're this big ball of life, why wouldn't we have little bits of microscopic organic material just floating around the outer atmosphere where the space station
is? Or at least during, and this is mainstream starting to accept this, at least during impacts, when things are kicked into orbit,
right?
It would shoot stuff out that way.
Yes. I would be curious to see if we ever, has any research like this been done from any of the rovers or any of the things we've sent to Mars?
Oh yeah. We tested for life and we found it in 1977. The Viking lander, that, Dr. Gavin, what is his name? The principal investigator, the head guy for testing life, when we landed the Viking landers, published a thing. He's been saying it for 40 years, but he just published in Scientific American about 2 or 3 years ago and said, listen, damn it, I ran the life test and we found life. And there is a certain resistance in the field of astrobiology, in my view, is the most fucked up discipline on Earth. It is the most self-defeating, timid bunch of bullshitters that ever were. They'll never address this stuff. They'll only go so far. They're only looking for building blocks. And then we never test it again. There has not been a direct life detection instrument aboard any rover since. They can only test for the building blocks. Because it was ruled out. And here's a good one. Bill Clinton held a press conference in the Rose Garden and said we found life on Mars. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Google that one, Steve, because that's on YouTube.
What conference?
Just Bill Clinton,
just type in
life on Mars.
Bill Clinton, life on Mars, yeah.
Yeah.
What year did he say that? When he was
probably
president?
97 or 98.
96 right here. A group of scientists found you don't see it. A group of scientists found features of likeness of microscopic fossils of bacteria in a meteorite. Oh, no, that's not it.
That's it. There's a meteorite.
Suggesting that these organisms also originated on Mars. The claims immediately made headlines worldwide, culminating in the U.S. President Bill Clinton giving a speech about it.
We discovered life on another planet speech. Hell, the president gave it.
Right.
You can go hit videos and it'll come up and you say, Bill Clinton says it's a monumental day. We found life on Mars.
Oh, look at there.
Look at that.
I mean, this is not a conspiracy theory. The damn president said it. It's a travesty. It's a sociological travesty that somehow the bureaucracies cannot get past the supposed pursuit of life and go ahead and say, we found it 100 different ways. There have been all sorts of stuff seen in meteorites that suggest life. But it's the bar, they'll move the goalpost to beyond whatever they did. And they beat the hell out of the scientists who brought it to the president. And they ended up, Richard Hoover and those guys, they told them to shut the fuck up about it, that they were probably wrong. It could be other things. Because you see in that meteorite, you see these little things that look biological. And they come up with any other explanation that would be just as it's like discovering life is, the old thing that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That is the most harmful statement in the history of modern science. Carl Sagan, throw ashes on his damn grave. I mean, he said that, and that has now become the go-to place. No, you don't need extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claim. You need evidence. There's evidence is evidence is evidence. It doesn't need to be any more extraordinary just because of the claim.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to have to run it down. You're going to have to double check. But so now you bring forward any evidence and they say, well, that's just not extraordinary enough.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm getting into kind of my pet peeves here, and I don't want to get like Graham, get all angry at this. But yeah, there's something going on out there where we can't break through to the truth that's self-evident before us.